The rain came down in silver sheets, washing the color out of the world. Streetlights flickered over the cracked pavement of a quiet bus stop, the kind that smelled of rust and old dreams. A small girl stood there, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with one arm and a soaked blanket with the other. Her name was Alara. She was 4 years old. Her parents had promised her an adventure, a ride to the city to see the big lights. She had believed them, because at 4, belief is as natural as breathing. Marcus, her father, paced with hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Leela, her mother, kept glancing at the bus schedule as if the next ride could wash away their guilt. Alara, sweetheart, Leela said, crouching down to her daughter's height. Her smile trembled. Stay right here, okay? Mommy and Daddy will just get some snacks. Don't move, alright? Alara nodded, her curls plastered to her forehead. Can I have chocolate milk? Leela's throat tightened. Of course, darling. Just stay here. The last thing Alara remembered was the warmth of her mother's fingers slipping away, then the sound of their car engine. The red taillights glowing like 2 bleeding eyes in the rain, shrinking, then gone. She waited. Minutes, hours. The rain never stopped. Neither did she cry at first. She simply believed they'd come back. Children have a strange kind of faith that doesn't break easily. But as the night deepened, as the shadows grew colder and her blanket heavier with water, Faith turned to fear. Mommy? She whispered. Daddy. Her voice vanished into the storm. When the police found her curled under the bus stop bench, she was barely conscious. Her tiny lips blue from the cold. She didn't cry when they lifted her. She just whispered one name. Grandpa. Arthur Winters arrived before dawn, wearing an old coat over his pajamas, his hair wild from worry. He pushed past the officers, eyes blazing, and fell to his knees beside the child. Alara. His voice broke. Sweetheart, I'm here. I've got you now. Her eyes fluttered open, pale green, just like his late wife's. Grandpa, she murmured, weak but certain. And in that one word he heard everything she could not say. Arthur gathered her into his arms, wrapping her in his coat, glaring at the officers as if daring them to take her away again. When they told him what had happened, that Marcus and Leela's car was seen leaving town, that they hadn't returned, his face went still. His own son. His own flesh and blood. He carried Alara home that night, through the wet streets, refusing help. When he reached his old farmhouse, he lit the fireplace, sat her on his lap, and wrapped her in a wool blanket that smelled of cedar. They won't come back, will they? She asked quietly. Arthur hesitated, then kissed her damp hair. No, my dear. They won't. But I will never leave you. That night, while Alara slept in a warm bed for the first time in weeks, Arthur stood by the window, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. He made a vow aloud to the storm outside. They took my son's face, but they lost their souls. You, my little star, will never beg for love again. I'll make sure of it. The rain finally eased before dawn. In the garden below, the earth drank the last of it, and new shoots of lilies broke through the soil, fragile, but alive. And so was Alara. Years passed quietly in the old farmhouse that sat on the edge of a meadow, surrounded by whispering trees and the steady hum of bees. Alara grew up there, her days filled with the scent of lilacs, the sound of her grandfather's voice, and the rhythm of healing. Arthur Winters was a man of the earth. He believed in growing things, flowers, vegetables, people. When Alara was 5, he gave her a patch of soil behind the barn. This is yours, he told her, handing her a trowel too big for her tiny hands. Plant what you love, and it will love you back. At first, she planted everything wrong. Seeds too deep, too close, too dry. But Arthur never scolded her. He'd just kneel beside her, his knees cracking like old wood, and show her how to loosen the soil, how to whisper to the roots before covering them again. Gentle, he'd say. Everything grows better when it's treated gently. Under his care, Alara learned that not all love leaves. Some stays, steady and patient, like sunlight on a garden. When she was 8, she asked about her parents for the first time. Grandpa, do you think they remember me? Arthur looked up from pruning a rose bush. He hesitated before answering. People who throw away gold often chase glitter, Alara. But that's their curse, not yours. She didn't ask again. Instead, she poured her silence into her studies and her art. She painted flowers, built birdhouses, and read aloud by the fire in the evenings. Arthur listened with quiet pride, a mug of tea always in hand. He called her his little sunbeam, though sometimes she caught a shadow in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. A fear that the world might one day come for her gentle heart again. By the time she turned 17, Elara had blossomed into a bright, graceful young woman. She helped her grandfather with his business, a modest company that supplied organic herbs to local stores. Together they turned the overgrown garden into a thriving greenhouse. Their laughter often echoed through the halls, softening the loneliness that once haunted the old farmhouse. But even gardens must face seasons of change. Arthur began to tire more easily. His once strong hands shook when holding his tools. Elara noticed, of course. She noticed everything. One evening, she found him sitting in his favorite chair by the window, a folder on his lap, his eyes distant. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "are you okay?" He smiled faintly. "Just old, my dear, just making sure I leave no weeds behind for you to pull." He handed her the folder. Inside were documents. Legal papers, bank statements, a will. Elara frowned. "I don't need this. I only need you." Arthur took her hand. "One day, I won't be here to protect you. But this will. Everything I have, every acre, every share, every penny, it's yours. You earned it with kindness, Elara. And remember." He paused, his voice softening to a whisper. "The purest revenge is living well. But never let wolves feast on your heart again." She wanted to argue, to insist he'd live forever, but his tone silenced her. That night, as he drifted to sleep, she sat by his bedside, tracing the lines of his weathered hand with her fingers, memorizing the warmth. The next morning, the house felt too quiet. The birds sang, the sun rose, and in the garden, the lilies swayed. But Arthur Winters, the man who had saved her, was gone. Elara buried him beneath the oak tree he'd planted when she was born. She placed her first ever bloom, a white lily, on the soil. And as the wind rustled through the branches, she whispered, "I'll make you proud, Grandpa. I promise." The house felt emptier than silence itself. After Arthur's funeral, Elara moved through the rooms like a ghost, her footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. Every photograph, every chair, every old mug still smelled faintly of him. Yet life demanded to move on, even when the heart didn't want to. For weeks, she devoted herself to keeping the garden alive. It was her last link to him. The lilies he'd loved most bloomed white as snow that spring, and she took it as a sign that he was still there, somewhere, watching. But peace is a fragile thing. It doesn't knock before it breaks. One afternoon, as Elara returned from delivering herbs to the local store, a sleek black car waited in her driveway. Two figures stepped out, a man in an expensive suit, and a woman whose perfume arrived before her voice did. For a moment, Elara's breath froze. She would have known those faces anywhere, even after all the years. Marcus and Leela, her parents. "Hello, Elara," Leela said, adjusting her sunglasses. "You've grown?" Elara didn't answer. Her body stiffened, her fingers tightening around the basket she carried. Marcus gave an awkward laugh. "Long time, huh? We were overseas. We just heard about your grandfather. Terrible loss. He was a good man." The words hit her like glass, sharp, fragile, and false. "You left me at a bus stop," she said flatly. "Don't pretend you forgot." Leela's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered it. "You were so young, darling. You don't remember how complicated things were." "I remember enough," Elara said, turning toward the house. "You should leave." But they didn't. A week later, an envelope arrived. Thick, stamped with a law firm's seal. Inside was a lawsuit. Her parents were suing her for $2.7 million, claiming Arthur had been mentally unfit, and that Elara had coerced him into rewriting his will. The words blurred as she read them. Her chest burned. Rage wasn't something Elara felt often. But now, it crawled up her throat like fire. They hadn't even visited Arthur once during his illness. They hadn't sent a single letter. And yet, now that he was gone, now that his wealth was in her name, they suddenly remembered they had a daughter. She spent that night in Arthur's study, staring at the will he'd left her, the one written in his neat, unwavering hand. On the last page, beneath his signature, he'd scribbled a note for Elara. "My heart, my legacy, my light." Tears blurred her vision. "They won't take you from me again," she whispered. The next morning, she called Lydia Kane, Arthur's old lawyer. A sharp, composed woman with a reputation for turning courtrooms into confessionals. Lydia listened quietly as Elara explained everything, her voice trembling only once. When she finished, Lydia said simply, "Then we'll make them regret ever finding your name again." The months that followed were a blur of depositions, paperwork, and the kind of pain Elara thought she'd buried years ago. Her parents painted her as manipulative, deceitful, a girl who'd tricked a dying man. Each headline that mentioned her name twisted her stomach. But beneath the hurt, something stronger began to take root. Not revenge exactly, but resolve. Arthur had taught her that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it grows in silence until it can no longer be ignored. So she waited. She gathered everything. The police reports from the night she was abandoned, the social worker's notes, the neighbors' testimonies, even the voicemail Arthur had once kept, where Marcus drunkenly admitted, "We can't take care of her anymore." They wanted a war. She would give them truth. As she sealed the folder of evidence and looked out toward the garden, she felt no anger, only clarity. The lilies swayed gently in the wind, as if bowing before a storm that had already chosen its victor. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a scent Elara would forever associate with both fear and triumph. Her parents sat across from her, stiff, backed and polished, their eyes darting between the judge and her calm, unwavering face. They had spent years trying to erase her, to turn her into someone they could claim as a commodity rather than a daughter. Elara didn't flinch. She had prepared for this day for more than a year, quietly, methodically, like planting seeds for a harvest no one would see until it was ready. Her lawyer, Lydia Kane, stood beside her, a silent sentinel. "Everything is in order," Lydia whispered. "Are you ready?" Elara nodded, feeling the pulse of determination steady in her chest. She rose when the judge called her name. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear. "I am not here to take anything from my parents, because they took everything from me already. But I am here to show the truth. The truth of abandonment, neglect, and greed." She presented the folder of evidence, police reports, child welfare documents, social worker testimonies, even the old voicemail Arthur had kept, where Marcus admitted he had left her at the bus stop because "We can't take care of her anymore." Each piece of evidence was a brick, and with it, the facade her parents had built crumbled quietly but completely. The courtroom was silent. Not a single eye blinked too quickly. Her parents' lawyer stammered, flustered, unable to deny the overwhelming proof. Marcus' face went pale, Leela's mask of superiority slipping into something darker. Shame, fear, maybe even recognition of the daughter they had tried to erase. When Elara finished, she didn't gloat. She simply said, "I forgive you. Not for you but for me. Your choices will no longer define my life." The judge ruled swiftly. The lawsuit was dismissed, her inheritance. Every acre of land, every business share, every dollar Arthur had left her, was hers, untouchable and secure. But the victory wasn't in the money. It was in the quiet strength that radiated from her, the unshakable knowledge that she had outgrown the bitterness her parents had tried to force upon her. Elara returned to her grandfather's garden that evening, the same garden where she had learned to trust, to nurture, and to grow. She knelt among the lilies, brushing her fingers across the petals. The air smelled of rain and earth, the same way it had the night Arthur found her at the bus stop. With a deep breath, she made her next move. She donated half her inheritance to a foundation for abandoned children, naming it the Arthur Hope Fund. It was a tribute to the man who had loved her when no one else would, a symbol of hope for those who might have none. When Marcus and Leela finally left town, their heads hung low, Elara watched them from the porch. There was no anger left in her gaze, only clarity and peace. "Thank you for leaving me," she whispered to the wind. "Without you, I found everything." That night, she walked through the rows of roses and lilies, the moon casting silver light over the garden. Each flower seemed to bow in quiet approval, as if her grandfather himself were watching, smiling. She felt him there. Not as a memory, but as a presence in the very soil he had tended, in the gentle rustle of leaves above her head, in the warmth of the earth beneath her feet. Elara had been abandoned once, sued by those who should have loved her, but she had emerged whole. Strong. Loved. And in the quiet, sweet justice of living her life fully, she had delivered the ultimate revenge. Not cruelty, but proof that love, patience, and courage always outlast betrayal. And for the first time in years, Elara slept under the stars without fear, her heart finally free.